is typography? Well, there's the American Heritage Dictionary definition, which defines typography as the composition of printed material from movable type. And it's also defined as the arrangement and appearance of printed matter. And I like to describe typography or typeface design as a blend of the organic gesture of the hand and the geometric nature of the machine. So these tensions inform and invigorate type design. But typography would not be as developed without a major invention that occurred, and that was the invention of the letterpress. And the letterpress is this machine that really changed the world. Early books were written by hand by scribes in monasteries, and they were incredibly time-consuming. A 200-page manuscript would represent 4 or 5 months of labor for a scribe, and it was very expensive. It would take 25 sheepskins of parchment. So paper was another huge technological invention that made the letterpress possible. And the process of a letterpress, it still takes time. For example, this poster took about 2 hours. But basically, you put all the letters, which are these blocks, into drawers. And there's a drawer for each typeface and size. And then you have these spacers, and these are examples of those, which are these strips of lead that you sort of lay out and you lock into place with these coins. And then you use this ink and you spread it out on a roller. Paper is fed into the machine and rolled through. And each piece needs to be set and locked into place with these types and spacers for kerning, leading, any white space on the page. And if you make one little mistake, you have to redo it. So it's time consuming. It's kind of like black and white photography printing. This amazing invention was invented by Johannes Gutenberg. And Johannes Gutenberg was a metal worker, and he was also an intellectual and a member of the elite. And he really was the first one to utilize these wooden blocks in this way. And it came about because of this huge need in society for knowledge. And for example, the growth of universities was really making books more in demand. And prior to this invention, basically most of the writing occurred in monasteries, and it was for a very few select people to read. So after this invention, books became much more accessible. Movable type had been invented earlier in China, so it's not a Western invention per se, but it had proven less useful there. The Chinese writing system contains tens of thousands of distinct characters, unlike the Latin alphabet, which translates the sounds of speech into small sets of marks. So all of these distinct characters didn't make it possible to create something like a letterpress because there were so many more than our very precise alphabet, which doesn't have that many letters. And the first book to be printed was called the Gutenberg Bible. And the printer had to make each letter out of lead, then set each separately within the frame, then print it. And this was for each page. And it took about 3 years to complete the printing of this Bible, where 200 Bibles were printed. Each Bible had 1,284 pages, and today 47 still exist. And Gutenberg's font used in the 42-line Bible was called blackletter. And we're going to talk a little bit more soon, but blackletter was the Gothic or Old English early manuscript lettering font that were used by the scribes at the time. But printing is a time-consuming process, and one reason is that for each color you place in a print, you have to run a separate complete running through the press. So here we have three colors. We have red, blue, and black, and so this would take 3 runs. And so even though this is just a tiny detail on the page, you have to run the whole page through the press a separate time for each color you add in. And music. So with the invention of the letterpress, printed music was able to be widely available. And this is sort of a sample of the first musical book to be printed. And you can kind of see the shape of the type and the imperfections of the final product. And prior to the letterpress, you would have to write out all of the notes on this parchment. And so it was a manuscript, and so there was just not a lot of access to it. So printed music really made the music industry flourish. So the origins of the alphabet, these early drawings are called pictograms, and pictograms were basically found in different places in the world. This is an example of some pictograms found in a cave in France, and they're estimated to have been drawn around 10,000 to 8,000 BC, and they're representing sort of objects in the physical world. We're not really sure what this particular pictogram means. It might be hunting instructions. That's one theory. It's sort of been, each of these little icons has been sort of translated. So here you have the hunter leaves home, sleeps one night on an island, goes to another island, sleeps 2 nights, hunts and kills a sea lion, and returns home. So we don't know why they told this little story, what its use was. We do know that later on, around 3100 to 2800, pictograms started to be used to keep records. And often you would find, or often pictograms have been found using grids to sort of organize and keep records of, they're thinking early merchants used these little graphics to sort of represent what was being sold or traded. And then over time, these pictograms sort of developed into ideographs. And ideographs are really just more complex objects and concepts. So here's, for example, a concept that represents 1 month, or sky, or morning. So they're not as simple as the pictograms. They're sort of adding in more to each little graphic. And the Phoenician alphabet was the first alphabet created, and it's a simplified writing form for communication and business transactions. And the Phoenicians were the first humans to create symbols to represent sounds of speech. And so you see Aleph and Beth. So this is A and B. Aleph meant ox. And instead of devising a new symbol for each sound, they took this existing symbol and just repeated it. The ancient Greek civilization gradually adopted the Phoenician alphabet for their use around 800 BCE. And they substituted simpler sounds to represent the letters, such as more like our ABCs today. And so the Greek alphabet is a set of 24 letters that have been used to write the Greek language since the late 9th or early 8th century BCE. And then the Romans either conquered or stole, some of both, adopted the modified the Greek alphabet. And 13 letters were left unchanged. 8 letters were revised, and 2 letters were added, and this created our 26 letters. Handwriting at that time was a process that was done by taking these square-edged reed writing tools. And so devices or technology were created to make creating thick and thin strokes to draw letters possible. So it's kind of like with these inscription square-edged reed writing tools, they would put these two little sharp edges together, and it's kind of like two pencils tied together and held at an angle. And that's how the scribes would create the letters or create the distinguishing, like sort of thick, thin transitions between the stroke or the strokes. Prior to movable type, there were two popular schools of writing. There was black letter forms, which was the basis for Gutenberg's typeface, and then there was humanistic, which was the basis for our current italic. And the differences between the two, black letter, sometimes called Gothic or Fraktur or Old English, was really what the scribes used for early manuscript lettering. And there's some families that emerge, so there's some distinction. Textuur or Rotunda or Schwabacher are all black letter forms of handwriting. But the problem is they're difficult to read as a body of text, and so they're not this typeface, black letter, and its sort of relatable families don't really print well. It's not very legible, and Roman and italic faces were easier. And so after the invention of the printing press in 1500, it became a lot less popular, except in Germany, who continued to use it. So humanistic, which this is an example of it, is the basis for our current italic. And the lettering style, this lettering style came about in the Renaissance, and it's really kind of based on organic human calligraphy. And it really blew up after the invention of movable type. And the softly rounded shapes and the lighter, more flowy nature of this typeface or family really was much better for printed material. The black letter was a lot more claustrophobic and just dense. And so this is what became sort of the basis for all of our modern typefaces, these more humanistic style.